Hello and welcome everyone. On to our next lesson in trigonometry, which is finding a missing side length. So if you haven't yet got your book and equipment, pause the video, make sure you get your maths book, pen, calculator, unpause the video, and we can begin. Alright, so lesson 3, so we will be learning to find a side length of a right angled triangle using trigonometry. So far we've learnt how to label the sides, opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse, and we've learnt the 3 different trig ratios, sine, cos, and tan. And we looked at that thing SOHCAHTOA, which was helping us work out the fractions for each of the 3 trig ratios. If you're still a bit unsure about it, don't sweat it because we will get more practice doing that in this particular lesson. And as you can see, here's an example here of the sorts of questions we're going to be doing. Right angled triangle, we're trying to find the length of one of the sides. Now, typically, we'd be using Pythagoras' theorem, right? To find the length of a missing side. But what you're going to notice with these questions is we don't know the length of the third side. So in this particular case, if we look at the one here that's in the green circle, right, this side here we don't know, so we can't use Pythagoras' theorem. Normally we'd be doing the square root of 12 squared minus, and then we're kind of stuck because we don't have that other side. Instead of that side there, instead we've been given an angle. It's in your room, Angie. Go into your room and get the blanket. Hey, Lawson, can you get the little blanket for Angus, please? Thanks, mate. In his room. Alright, so on to our notes for today. So sorry about that, guys. So pause the video. In your heading, this is our title, Missing Side Length, and copy down our notes. This is kind of it for our notes. There's 3 things we need to do for each of the questions. We label the sides. So this would be, the opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. We then write down the trig ratio that's relevant to the triangle. So there's 3 trig ratios, right? Sine, cos, and tan. But depending on the 2 sides that we have, we'll only be using one of them. And then the final step will either multiply or divide to get the answer. That third step you will need a calculator for. So if you don't have a calculator, you'll still be able to get through today's lesson. You just won't be able to do the final step of the questions, but you'll still be able to do all the most crucial and important stuff. All right, hopefully you've got this in your books, and let's move on to our first example. By the way, we will be copying in examples and solutions. Whether you want to do that at the end or after we finish each example, pause the video, copy it into your books. I'll leave that up to you. But let's crack on with the first one. So we want to find the length of x. So these are the 3 things that we need to do. First step is to label the sides. You will notice one of the sides is completely blank. I'm referring to this one down here. We don't know the length of it, and we're not trying to find the length of it. That's kind of like an unnecessary side for us. We have no interest in it at all. The 2 sides that are of interest to us is the hypotenuse, right? This 12. It's of interest because we know the length of it already, which is kind of cool. And the other side which is of interest to us is this other vertical side here, which would be, if we check it out, look at the 30 degrees, the side over there would be the opposite. And this side is of interest to us because we're trying to find the length of that side. So these are the 2 sides in question. Now, which of the 3 trig ratios, so that's, by the way, that's first step 1, we've labeled the sides. We're going to ignore the blank side, right? We don't need that side at all. So we've labeled the sides. The next one is to write down the trig ratio. Well, which trig ratio uses opposite and hypotenuse? That's what SOHCAHTOA is for, right? So which one, sine, cos, or tan, which one had opposite and hypotenuse, the O and the H? And hopefully we can all see it's the first one, it's the sine. So our second step, now that we've labeled the sides, is to write down the trig identity. It's sine So it's going to be sine of the angle. Right, remember the angle always goes with the trig. So sine of the angle, which is 30 degrees. Let me get rid of this arrow just to try and keep things a bit neat. So sine 30 is going to be equal to, all right, look up here at SOHCAHTOA. It's O first and then H. We learned how to do this in the last lesson. Opposite, which is x, divided by hypotenuse, which is 12. That is the hardest step of this lesson, that right there, writing out the trig identity. Because once you've got the trig identity done, you're only one step away from finding the answer. And that is to either multiply or divide. Let me explain. We're trying to find the value of x. Here it is. Notice how x is on the top of the fraction. Top means times. We're going to multiply. For us to get our answer, x is going to be the 12 times sine 30. So whenever the pronumeral, in this case for our lesson, we're just going to use the letter x, but it could be any letter really. Whenever that pronumeral is on the top, we're going to multiply. You can probably guess what's going to happen when it's on the bottom, but we'll get to that in, I think, the second example. All right, so it's on the top, so we ended up timesing, and then now, only now do you need your calculator, and you just type what we've written here, 12 times sine 30, in your calculator exactly how it's written. Very crucial that you have your calculator in degrees mode. If you're not sure how to put that in, it's in like your settings, or you can just reset your calculator because degrees is the default setting. So it should have like a little D, tiny little D up the top of the screen of your calculator somewhere. If it has an R or a G, you're in a different mode. So you want to reset your calculator, get into degrees. And if you type this in, you end up getting 6 centimeters. So that there was the length of our side. That's 6 centimeters. So that's our first example. Make sure you got that in your book, and let's look at another one. So the process we just did, that first one, is the same process for the whole lesson. We've got our 3 steps here. Step 1, label the sides. Which sides do we have here? All right, the longest side, right? The one opposite the right angle is our hypotenuse, always. So we've got a hypotenuse again. And then the other side that's of interest to us, remember we're ignoring the blank side, is this 15 centimeters. And when we look at the included angle, 65 degrees, is 15 centimeters on the opposite side to it, or is it adjacent to it? It is clearly on the opposite side. This is the opposite side. Okay, so we've labeled the sides, opposite and hypotenuse. Step 2, the tricky step, is to write down the trig identity. Well, you'll probably you won't need to rewrite SOHCAHTOA every time, right? You write it once at the top of the page and you're set to go. For me, every single question's a new page. So, here we go. I've got to write it down again, but it's no sweat. This particular triangle was an OH triangle, so we just need to work out SOHCAHTOA, which one has the O and the H, and yet again it's the first one. We've got another sine question. So, step 2 is to write out the trig ratio. So we're dealing with sine, so it's sine 65 is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, right? You write them out in the same order that they are up in SOHCAHTOA. Sine, always put the angle with the trig, is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. The order is important. And the reason for that is because now when we do that, by the way, step 2 is done. We wrote out the trig ratio. That was the hard part we just did. You'll notice the x, boom, is on the bottom. It's on the bottom. So we're on to our final step. Multiply or divide to get the answer. When x was on the top, we timesed, right? When x is on the bottom, we're going to end up dividing. So the way we do this final step is still include the side length first. 15, but this time instead of times we're dividing. So we need to divide by sine 65 this time. And then only now you get out your calculator, you type it in, you press equals, you round it to 1 decimal place. And that hypotenuse was 16.6 centimeters, right? So that is that side length right there, which is larger than the 15 centimeters, which is good because it was a hypotenuse, it was supposed to be. All right, second example. Once you've got that in your books, we'll move on to the third. All right, so, but by the way, I just want to mention these first two examples were both sine, right? The sine ratio. Obviously, we've got two more examples. One will be cos and the other will be tan, just so you can see all three trig ratios. But I want to point out that we've seen sine where it was a divided by, and we've seen sine where it was a times. This can be the case for all three ratios. Okay, so sometimes when I do the lessons, I do one question which is sine, next question was a cos one, but you had to divide, and then students start thinking every sine is times and every cos is divide. It's not that way. It could be sine, cos, or tan, and all of them could have potentially a times question or a divide question. And the way you tell is where the pronumeral is on the fraction. If it's on the top, you times. If it's on the bottom, you divide. That's the worst M, by the way. So that whole word is very messy. Hopefully you can see that. Bottom equals divide. Anyway, let's move on. Example number 3. Find the length of x to 1 decimal place. Let's go. Step 1, label the sides. Hypotenuse yet again, getting bored of that. And x, well, we go to the 39 degrees. The opposite is over here. That's the blank side. We don't care about the blank side. X is next to the 39. It is adjacent to the 39 degrees. This question is an A and H question. You would then be looking at the SOHCAHTOA, which you probably have written at the top of your book right now. Which one has A and H, right? A and H. And it's the middle one. It's the cos ratio has A and H. It's the K from SOHCAHTOA. So we do the tricky step. We write out the trig ratio. Cos, with the trig, always put the angle cos 39 is equal to A and then H. So we need to put A first and then H. You've got your second step done. That was a tricky step. The final decision is just to work out whether we times or divide. That's it. And so you look, x is on the top of the fraction. So x will be 22.5 times the cos 39. We're multiplying for this one. So we times it out. We put it into our calculator. We get an answer. And the example is done. All right, example number 4 and our final example for this lesson. We're getting near the end. We've seen sine twice. We've seen a cos. You can probably guess which one this one's going to be, but let's pretend we don't know. All right, first step, label the sides. All right, the blank side is actually our hypotenuse, right? We don't care about blank side. We've got the other two sides that are of interest to us. One we know, the other we're trying to find. Which sides are they? Well, look at the 42 degrees. On the opposite side of it, you'll find the opposite side. The side next to it, or adjacent to it, is where you find the adjacent side. So we have an O and A. We would then look at SOHCAHTOA and work out which one has O and A. And bam! How do we know? It was the tan ratio. T stands for tan. How do you know that? Your calculator has them right next to each other. Sine, cos, and tan. Even in the same order that SOHCAHTOA is in, right? So it's all there for you if you got that electronic device with you. Okay, so tan is opposite over adjacent. We go into the second step, the crucial step, the hard step, so to speak, although most of you are probably finding it's not that hard. Okay, T stands for tan. Tan, what do we put with the trig ratio? We put the angle. Tan 42 is going to be equal to, all right, what's our fraction going to look like? It's O first and then A. Opposite over adjacent. All right, we did it. Wipe off the sweat. We just did the hard part. We're on to the final step. All we need to do, right? Final step, multiply or divide to get your final answer. We labeled the signs, we got the right trig ratio written down, and now we times or divide depending on where that pronumeral is. It's on the bottom. Bottom means divide. 6.8 divided by 1042. Type it in your calculator. You come up with an answer and you can celebrate. There are 4 examples. Make sure you got them in your books. So you can look back. You don't have to look back through videos or anything like that. You just have it all there nice and neat when you're prepping and that sort of stuff. Okay, I've got 3 questions for you guys to do. So, whether you choose to write these neatly into your book or just do it, in your exercise book on a scrap bit of paper or, on your hand, I don't mind. Pause the video, have a go at answering these 3 questions. Once you've done them to the best of your ability, unpause the video and I'll pop the answers up. Okay, question 1. This one was actually weird for rounding. You should have gotten your calculator like a 10.99 blah 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 blah. When rounding that, it would be 11.0 centimeters. Right, that should have been your answer for the first. For the second one, no real tricks here. You should have been using, in this case, a cos, and you would have ended up having to divide 21.1 meters. And for the final one, it was a sine question and a times. You should have got 70.6 centimeters as your answer. Anyway, hopefully you had some success and you're enjoying your trig so far. It's a pretty fun and easy topic, and I'll see you for the next one. All right, bye.